Good afternoon. All right, thank you very much. My name is Akin Mayowa. I'm standing in for Professor Kaide Shola. We're going to have 5 presentations as the program has, and we're going to have the presentation according to the way it's listed. All the presenters are here. Okay, so just go. The title of the panel is Theorizing African Studies, Continuities and Changes. And then it's organized by Amena Gahon, and then it's to be chaired by Professor Taibir Shula. So we'll have the first presenter. So each presenter will have 10 minutes, so we can have a bigger, robust discussion afterwards. So I'll call on the first presenter, who is Damilola Adeni.
She's online.
She's online. All right. So over to you. You have 10 minutes. Can you hear us?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. So go ahead. You've got 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Can you go ahead? Oh, okay.
Yes. Yeah. Good day, everyone.
Yes, good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon. Yes, the topic before me is the life and legacy of Odulami Abiodun George in organ music. So basically, organ music came to Nigeria through the advent of Christianity. The history of organ music can be traced to T.K. Phillips, who is known as father of organ in Nigeria, followed by Fela Showande. The first organ was actually played in Marina, Lagos State. Before then, they were using ammonium and flutes before the advent of the real pipe organ. However, from the time till contemporary time, female gender has not gained prominence in organ musicianship. But in recent times, a limelight fell on Odulami Abiodun George, who is the pioneer president of the Association of Nigeria Female Organists. So this is what brought about the topic. So this the paper is to actually give essence of woman in organ musicianship. So the aim and objective of this paper is to provide a nuanced understanding of our experience and achievements as a female musician in male-dominated field. So this topic will actually investigate on her early life, musical training, and career, as well as her role in promoting organ music in Nigeria. It will also give access to our legacy, continual relevance of Odulami's contribution, Nigeria organ music. It will also examine the role of women in organ music and the way they shape the country landscape. So these are my significance of study. The significance of study is to identify the relevance of women in the artist music in Nigeria, to provide understanding of Odulami's experience and achievement as a musician in a male-dominated field. So these are my literature review. So this research topic is a biographical research. So these are my literature review. So the methodology, how the research should be actually be carried out. So the study employed on qualitative approach in carrying out the research, and there will be a semi-structured interview conducted with Mrs. Odulami Abiodun George. It comprised the biographical, musical, cultural, and historical analysis. So data collection will be through the artist, the internet information gathered from structured interview of a fan, and primary data will be collected through primary source. So method of analysis, these are the method of analysis. The research study will provide a thorough examination of Odulami's life, music, and legacy, highlighting our pioneering role in shaping organ music in Nigeria. The research finding will have a significant implications for musicology, cultural study, and Nigerian history, underscoring the importance of preserving Nigeria's rich and musical heritage. So findings on his musical formations and family influences. She actually began her musical journey in 1999 by joining the choir at St. Stephen Anglican Church, Lagos. So his motivation was actually stemmed from desiring for a responsibility and independently in the choir. She actually gained an independent from choir. She also got exposure from church music, sparked a lasting passion despite no formal secondary school music education. She got a passion from the choir. Now, another one is strong family support, especially from her father, who attended concerts and church events with her, was instrumental in nurturing her confidence and commitment to music. So this, her father gave her a strong support. Her father is a support system in her music journey. So findings about her education challenge and career. She received private music training post-secondary school, including an early voice exam. Today, she got her training from post-secondary school. She doesn't have any training at secondary school, but it was post-secondary school that she gained that. Now, another one is she studied at Lagos State University and bagged a BA in music, currently pursuing a master's degree. Now, she actually also balanced academic studies with motherhood. An undergraduate year, and she also highlighted challenges faced by women, but with that, she was a success. So, over 16 years of experience as choir master, this actually a long-lasting leadership as a woman at a church to demonstrate a deep-rooted community impact. So, findings on mentorship and professional identity. Mentorship has actually played a crucial role in our life, development and growth, especially from a mentor like Dr. Segun Fadeyi. Dr. Segun Fadeyi actually played a vital role in her life because she actually helped her from onset. Another one is that she gained a technical and moral support through choir leadership. Yes, choir leadership has actually played a lot of role in her life. Choir leadership has helped her to see a lot of things that she can do as a woman. Another one is she is also a member of Association of Nigerian Female Organists. This actually give her a strong belief that she can actually be in a professional community. So the next one is she it has actually emphasized on church-based mentorship and leadership. So this findings
You have
also
3 minutes
gives
more.
us like, all right,
all right, okay.
gives us, it emphasizes on the value of church-based mentorship. Like church-based mentorship is actually important, and this has actually helped her to shape leadership in female musicians' identity in Nigeria. But in conclusion, the subject musical journey influence reflect the power of early exposure, family support, resilience, in overcoming challenges, and to achieve success as a choir director and committed musical profession. So this research topic is actually telling us the essence of a woman. The woman can actually do what is impossible. So thank you.
Thank you very, very much, and thank you for keeping the time.
Yes.
So we'll have all the questions at the end of all the presentations. So if you have questions for her, just note. And please don't go away. So we'll move on to the next presentation, which is Eco-Philosophy and the Quest Towards Climate Change, Theory in Africa by Idokunlu Akinla.
Thank you, sir. I think first I need to say that the topic has changed a bit, as you will see from the PowerPoint. After writing the paper, I noticed that the topic didn't capture the essence of what was in the paper, so I had to tweak it a bit. Now, the topic is African ethical frameworks in eco-philosophical discourse, rethinking climate justice. That is the topic of or the title of the paper. Climate change is at the front burner of contemporary global debates, although some people will call it a propaganda, but we can see the effects of climate change all around us. The world is at the brink of environmental sustainability with extreme weather, high rise in sea level rise, the health challenges, which has affected food, water, even the basic rights of humans. Africa is not left out of this climate-induced crisis. We've heard of droughts, floods, rising sea levels, even public health emergencies. I think it was about 2 weeks ago, the windstorm, if I'm correct, I think was in Benue, or to Benue now. But so I'm just trying to say Africa is not left out from this induced crisis. We've had scientific evaluation of climate change. That is not what I'm to talk about here today. I'm to talk about the ethical aspects of climate change, which talks about responsibility, rights, fairness, equality, and equity. All these must be addressed. And this is why focus has shifted to climate justice, not climate change, because we are looking at how there can be an equitable distribution of burdens and social, economic, and environmental impacts of climate change. According to Tom Brooks, particularly vulnerable countries, the low and middle income countries who are mostly affected, yet they contribute very little to climate change. We've had several theories, ethical and sociopolitical theories employed to interrogate climate justice. The problem statement of this paper is, while existing theories such as utilitarianism, contractarianism, eco-philosophy, ecofeminism, to mention a few, offer important insights to climate justice, they are limited and largely rooted in Western epistemologies and ontologies. The perspective of Global South on the issue of climate change are often overlooked. And we have cases where they are not even articulated, where Africa is most times not considered when there is a need to have climate change laws, or we have an issue of the dumping of non-eco-friendly materials in Africa. This gap calls for the integration of African ethical thoughts into global climate discussions. What are the key objectives? To critically assess the limitations of existing theories in climate justice discourse, to explore Odera Oruka's concepts of parental health ethics, and the right to human minimum as framework for climate justice. And lastly, to explore the potentialities of Ubuntu and Oduifa as theoretical resources in global climate justice debates. I looked at some theories, like I said, and for instance, utilitarianism that prioritizes the greatest good for the greatest number of people, sometimes would overlook the vulnerable minority. For instance, countries in the global south or Africa, if we want to put it in context. And we begin to ask questions, ethical questions like, whose good are we talking about? Whose happiness? Who is the majority? And this contradicts, an African worldview like Ubuntu that emphasizes inclusion and moral equality. And it also reminds us of this, reminds me of this Yoruba adage that I lower, what's that word? I lower, thank you. So it doesn't matter, I might be minority, but I still should be involved in the debate. I also looked at, I'm just going to move now to eco-philosophy, which is primarily, or was primarily developed for environmental justice, unlike utilitarianism that was an existing ethical theory used to explain climate justice. But eco-philosophy was primarily developed for environmental justice. It's a relatively new aspect of philosophy, and it concerns the relations and interrelations of humans with nature. Eco-philosophy tends to prioritize nature over people. For instance, neglecting the human nature spirit relationship we have in African worldview. Now, we had mentioned before that we need to start to include African perspectives in global climate justice discourse. One of the African perspectives is Odero Oruka's parental ethics and the right to human minimum. For instance, the parental ethics sees the earth as a family unit. It describes the earth as, or the relationship between earth and nature as the relationship between children and their parents, which means we need to care for the environment and the future generation. His parental ethics was a critique of Garrett Hardin's lifeboat ethics. Hardin, I would just like to talk about this a bit, believes that or argues that rich nations do not owe the poor nations. He believes that when you keep giving the poor people, the poor countries grants and aids and reliefs, they tend to remain poor. They would not solve their own problems. And also, Odero Oruka mentioned the right to a human minimum. He believes that there's a universal right that supersedes territorial sovereignty. I am a man in Nigeria. I'm also a man in America, irrespective of creed, geographical territory, religion, political affinity. I must get the human minimum, the right to a human minimum. He believes that without the human minimum, man ceases to be man. I'm going to jump quickly now. Ubuntu is another theoretical resource that can be useful for climate justice discourse. It talks about how it revolves around humanness, solidarity, communality, and how the community, by extension the world, has shared condition experiences. One member is linked to another. The success of one affects the whole, that's the group, and the whole affects the individual. In terms of climate justice debates, Ubuntu would help to promote restoration over retribution. It would help to look at how communal land tenure reflects African respect for ancestors and future generations, unlike Rose's position on climate justice. He believes present generations do not owe future generations. Another part of, or another theoretical framework that can be used for climate justice is Oduifa. Specifically, I'm going to move to a part of Ogbeyeku, that's verse 10:5, that talks about Biaba Fire Sileniko Akiri Renita. And your voice. So when when the goodness is only restricted to one's home or to an individual, there's likely not to be goodness outside. So it warns against selfishness, and goodness should go beyond the home to sustain society. He also promotes Ajoshe mutual support, which is one of the which should be one of the principles of climate justice if you really want to achieve justice. One notable thing about Oduifa is how it supports rich countries to give to vulnerable ones, not as charity now, like Herding proposed, but as a form of justice. In all of this, the African moral thought offer a rational justice that is rooted in solidarity, dignity, and ecological care. These African perspectives can be considered when it comes to climate justice discourse, so that the climate justice discourse can be truly global instead of restricted or restricted to dominated Western theories. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you also for the time. So we'll move on to the third presenter, and the topic is embracing homegrown theories, Afrocentric approaches to the decolonizing knowledges, and advancing inclusive global scholarship. And this is to be presented by Frank Ahmed.
Thank you, Doc. And good afternoon to everyone. Doc has already mentioned the title, so I want to comment on my title. Afrocentric approaches to decolonizing knowledge and advancing inclusive global scholarship was chosen to emphasize ways of knowing as valid and powerful tools for dismantling colonial biases in the academia and research. So the expression homegrown theories push back against the marginalization of African knowledge, while the expression Afrocentric approaches in the title demonstrate a clear resistance to Western-centered thinking. Then the expression decolonizing knowledge connects the work with scholars who critique academic power imbalances. And the expression inclusive scholarship regards African ideas as vital and not strange to contributions to worldwide learning. So the title isn't merely about criticism. It's a call to action, urging academics and researchers to take African epistemologies seriously and to promote fairer and more diverse knowledge. So I take a look at the research gap. Despite the growing recognition of the value of indigenous African knowledge systems, their integration into mainstream academic discourse remains fragmented and marginalized due to persistent structural, number one, epistemological, number two, and institutional barriers. So, while scholars have advocated for Afrocentric approaches to decolonize knowledge, much of the existing literature either focuses on critiquing Western hegemony without offering concrete methodological alternatives. So There is also the limited research on how homegrown African theories can be systematically operationalized across disciplines, such as the academia, such as governance, such as health, to challenge the dominant epistemologies. So essentially, this study addresses the gap by exploring how Afrocentric approaches can strategically center on academic research, pedagogy, and policy to advance a more equitable and pluralistic knowledge ecosystem. So based on the research gap, I crafted a problem statement. Now, the dominance of Western knowledge production in academia has resulted in the marginalization of our African knowledge systems, thereby relegating our African knowledge systems to the periphery of scholarship discourse. Despite the potential of African knowledge systems to offer culturally relevant and sustainable solutions to our contemporary challenges. So, while there are calls to decolonize this knowledge, the calls to decolonize this knowledge have increased over time. Yet, the hegemony has continued. So this study seeks to address this problem by exploring actionable strategies for centering Afrocentric approaches in ways that validate African epistemologies while contributing to transformative global knowledge. So I propose a theoretical framework to guide this work. It is grounded in 3 theoretical frameworks. First, we have Afrocentricity. Second, we have epistemic decolonization. And third, we have indigenous knowledge systems theory. So together, these 3 frameworks provide a foundation for interrogating the marginalization of African epistemologies, advocating for their integration into global scholarship, and proposing actionable strategies for decolonizing knowledge production. Now, Afrocentricity is articulated. 4 minutes. Okay, so I move from the framework to my research objectives. Research objective 1, to examine the structural and epistemological barriers hindering the integration of indigenous African knowledge systems into mainstream academic discourse. Then the corresponding research question is, what are the key institutional, methodological, and ideological challenges that marginalize Afrocentric theories in global scholarship? Objective 2, to explore the potential of Afrocentric approaches in providing culturally relevant and sustainable solutions to contemporary challenges in education, governance, and health. Research question 2, how can homegrown African theories be applied to disciplines such as education, governance, and health to address context-specific solutions? We have objectives 3 and 4, but I'll skip them for the moment because of the constraints of time. I'll skip the significance of the study and look at a bit of methodology.
You can just go through your findings.
No, it's a proposal, so I haven't gotten to the finding stage yet. Okay. Yes. So given the interdisciplinary and decolonial nature of the research, I propose a qualitative approach. Now, this qualitative approach is grounded in 3 areas: decolonial action research, Afrocentric research paradigm proposed by Molife Asante, and then finally, endogenous knowledge framework proposed by Butonji. I hope I got the name correctly. So what are my data collection methods? I intend to do a review of literature and do a critical discourse analysis with the objective of examining existing scholarship on Afrocentric theories, decolonial studies, and indigenous knowledge systems. Then I intend to do key informant interviews and focus group discussions, with the participants being African scholars specializing in indigenous knowledge, traditional leaders, griots, and community elders. Now, I skip to data analysis methods. So, 1 minute, okay. So I intend to do a thematic analysis by interviewing, using focus group discussion transcripts, then using critical Western and African knowledge systems in selected disciplines of education, etc., etc. My expected outputs or outcomes: to get a decolonial framework for integrating African theories into global academia, to do policy briefs for academia and institutions or states, and to propose pedagogical models. Of course, the limitation to my study is that it is still on the drawing board. It is a proposal, and therefore, I hope that with this methodology, it will ensure a rigorous, a culturally grounded, and transformative approach in align with the goals of decolonizing knowledge and advancing inclusive scholarship.
All right, thank you. Thank you, all the presenters so far. We're doing well with time. We move on to the 4th and final presentation, and that is, the title is of this continuity or complementarity, interrogating the role of Western theories and theorizing in African studies, and it's going to be delivered by Amena Gormore.
Thank you, sir. Good day, everyone.
Good day.
The presentation is inspired by an intellectually engaging lecture at the Institute of African and Diaspora Studies that was delivered on research methods and methodologies. The lecture spurred questions such as, did the idea of theory originate in Africa? If not, then how might we meaningfully explain social phenomena using indigenous African methods and frameworks? The stimulating thoughts form the foundation of my presentation, which poses an intellectual disruption of what was and what is to what ought to. The paper, the title has been mentioned, it is of discontinuity or complementarity, interrogating the role of Western theories and theorizing in African studies. And my name is Amena Rawandel. Our increasingly complex world demands a hybrid system of knowing. Such hybridity or complementarity is necessary for understanding the complex nature of social-political phenomena. Interestingly, some theories currently used in African studies and even other studies have birthed an array of misrepresentation, underrepresentation, or overrepresentation that underplay knowledge production towards indigenously generated systems of knowing, especially one that reflects the experiences of Africans. There's an adage in my dialect that says, what that implies is if the owner of an item doesn't mind the item or the property, one who doesn't own it will treat it as trash. To the extent that Western theories and theorizing have been idealized, essentialized, or even mythicized to undermine cultural specificities. And that is why, despite scholarly attempts for epistemic autonomy or break from epistemic dependency, where Western thoughts become a default theory, and also and epistemic plurality or hybridity, there exists limited integration of indigenous ways of knowing scholarship. And the conceptual gap is hinged on the need for theoretical expansionism in academia. And that reverses the recession of African consciousness and African intellectualism for reconstruction of knowledge production, especially in African studies. The objective of this paper are simple: three. One, to debunk the myth of superiority of Western theories. By superiority, the presenter posits a combination of ideologies that have been birthed from social stratification and ethnocentrism. And secondly, the objective is to juxtapose Afro-autochthonous epistemologies with Western theories and theorizing. And number three, to contribute a cultural balance sheet, that is to provide a common pool of knowledge production that is necessary for reconfiguring African studies. The research questions are: one, to what extent does the perceived superiority of Western theories obscure or even disrupt the complexities of the indigenous system of knowledge? How do Afro-autochthonous epistemologies intersect Western theories? And thirdly, in what ways does the cultural balance sheet promote intellectual complementarity between the knowledge, systems of knowledge, that is, indigenous ways of knowing and Western ways of knowing? And for the methodology of this paper, the researcher adopted qualitative methods through comparative analysis and applied epistemology. And then at the end of each of the stage of analysis, a discussion was provided using a cultural balance sheet, as I mentioned, for the interpretation of the relevance of the findings. A multidisciplinary approach focused primarily on the organization of data in relation to contextual relationships between Western knowledge productions and indigenous knowledge production. What is theory, we may say? It's defined as a systematically organized set of concepts, principles, and propositions that explain how knowledge is generated, justified, and applied within specific concepts. And then we have Jacquard and Jacobi define theory as a collection of claims concerning the relationships between two or more concepts or structures. And by Western theory, in the course of this paper, I mean theories that are developed within Western philosophical, social, and intellectual traditions. Whereas Western theorizing infers the process of developing and applying the theories to specific social phenomena. By Afro-autochthonous epistemology, I refer to indigenous or locally rooted ways of knowing and understanding that emerge from African cultural, historical, and social context. And then also, we also have terms such as complementarity that talks about either or, which one plays the role, discontinuity, which stems from incompatibilities between the Western theorizing and indigenous theorizing. And by cultural balance sheet, the researcher adopts the term as an analytical tool to weigh epistemological assets and epistemological liabilities of both Western and Afro-autochthonous frameworks. For the literature review, the researcher looked through modernization theory, which referenced Western trajectories as a one-size-fits-all approach, and especially to economic and political development. We also looked at dependency theory and further theories in African studies, such as Marxism, structuralism, post-structuralism, which talk about the historical imposition during colonial and post-colonial knowledge production. Also, there are African scholars who have projected African views of knowing, such as Ngigi wa Thiong'o in Decolonizing the Mind, and we also have Oyeroke Oyewumi in The Invention of Women, making an African case of Western gender discourses. And we have Colin Udunti, Kayode Suola, and of course we have Akin Otiko Mayowa, among others. And these propose form of decoloniality, like Ungilu was Tiongos, and epistemic autonomy, epistemic plurality, and also extreme cases like Mignono's case of epistemic disobedience. Now, the case of complementarity in the work is evidenced in the work of Frank Fanon's on his use of hybrid way of psychoanalytics and African philosophy. Right. So I'll be dive down. For the purpose of this presentation, I juxtapose two African autochthonous hypotheses and ideology to present a cultural balance sheet that I already mentioned. First is Aki Umayowa's that is to act as someone that has blood flowing through one's veins. And I'm grateful that he's here to speak more, as the chair of this panel. And what is that? What does that imply? It implies an ethical theory of interaction in African traditional medicine, which aligns with the Western theory of the normative theory of rights of action. It also aligns with Meth's ethical theory of Ubuntu. Again, I also look at the 10-10 hypothesis from Eshuola, which provides a co-join of Yoruba and Hausa indigenous hypothesis, where you have the Yoruba word Obamewa, Ibamewa, Loni Leaye, which in transcription in Hausa, Serikin Goma, Zamani Goma. In contrast to modernization theory, we see that references with Western trajectories present a one-size-fits-all, like I said, but I'm going to go straight to the balance sheet. Number one, for the balance sheet, I look at African and Western theories as a form of epistemological assets or epistemological liabilities. I also look at them, interrogate in terms of cultural assets or as cultural liabilities. And for Western theories, it is the findings are that there is emphasis on empirical evidence and rationality, and then structured methodologies, universal frameworks, and often leading to generalization, like what we see in the modernization theory. But in Afro-autochthonous theorizing, embedded in it is the knowledge rooted in lived experiences and oral tradition of the African people. And that provides a form of holistic integration of the spirituality, communality, and even the economical and ecological wisdom of Africans. For example, we look at the symbolic representation of the Aje in Akio Otiko's work, and also the Ifa sourced wisdom in the Shuola's 10-10 hypothesis. For epistemological liabilities on both ends, we see that the Western theories are often detached from local context, right? And that is why one peg doesn't fit all, right? And for Afro-autochthonous theorizing, it may be dismissed as non-scientific or it's even murky, and it presents a risk of existentialism, and also as under-resourced systems of knowledge. For cultural assets, for Western theorizing, we see the individualized agencies, and the presentations of logic. And then for indigenous assets, we see communal ethics, as in the case of Akio Otiko's hypothesis in relation to the Ubuntu in oral history and indigenous wisdom. Again, cultural liabilities are present under the westernization or Western theorizing. We see a disconnection from the ecological or even the spiritual dimensions, but that is included in the traditional theorizing. How about power? Lastly, another yardstick for the comparison is power and autonomy for both of them. For Western theorizing, there seems to be, like I mentioned earlier, a hierarchy, a hierarchical presentation, whereby the West is superior to the rest. However, for indigenous, there seems to be a decentralization that is hinged on consensus. Do we really agree, for example, with the presentations of the African hypothesis that is being presented today? Now, what is the so what? Because of time, I will skip that and I will recommend and conclude. Number one, that recommendation would be that African studies, especially However, it isn't limited to African studies. Maybe I'll say scholarship should consider theory reception. And secondly, curricular and funding priorities should be for African theories. And thirdly, there should be a focus or refocus on local languages, because in all of these Afro-autochthonous ideologies presented, we see the role play of language, of history, and African epistemologies in theory making. In conclusion, as the researcher perceives that beyond the function of theories as identical markers, African theories and African theorizing represent a hub of linguistic and cultural repertoires that are located within context of real existential problems that are implied by it. And that is why thoughts from African worldview can be well interpreted, if not best interpreted, by indigenous theories, such that will aid survival of Africa's lingua cultural heritage in the global space. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you for the beautiful presentations. I'm glad I stepped in when the panel was about to start. It's time for us to ask questions. I think we'll have about 30 minutes. I will just ask the question. So the question is directed to note it down, and then we will come to you. Yes, I'll give numbers and then we'll go from it out. But because I have the floor, I think I can be so that. Answer number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4. Okay. Thank you very much for each of the presenters. So the first person is she online, Damilola Negi. Are you there? Okay, when she comes. The second,
yes, sir.
Okay, you're there. I'm just wondering what theory you use. I'm wondering what theory you use, particularly because the panel is about theorizing. What theory did you use? And then why did you choose those methods of gathering data? It's just a biography. Why did you use those methods that you chose? Then to the next presenter, which is, do we have multiple versions of eco-philosophy? If your understanding of eco-philosophy is how humans relate, do we have multiple versions? And if we do have multiple versions, how do you synchronize it without localizing eco-philosophy in Africa? And to Frank ask him, isn't what Afrocentric theories doing ordinary? Isn't that what you want to do? What's new, what you want to do? And Afrocentric theories look inwards. Clearly, they look inwards and they say that. And then I'm asking why 3 theoretical frameworks? Not theory. Why we use 3 theoretical frameworks? And then the last presenter, I'm asking, engineering theories that are Afrocentric in nature is not because we just want to pick up words. It's because of the lack that you find in Western theories. So theories don't just emanate because, let's just have something that speaks African. So it's good to create a gap, and you did that to your confusion. Because ordinarily theories are supposed to be universalized. Even though it stems from an African context, it should be applicable to another context outside Africa if they are relevant. So the question then is, are these theories that you're proposing, are they just because they have to have an African face, or there are significant lacks that you think theories that are Western are not needed? On that note, I open the floor for question, and I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, and then 4. Or I can treat it later first. Then we'll go out. Yeah. Theory, yes.
My question is actually from you.
Really?
Does theory have to be universalized?
Okay, I'll answer that after all the
Because I
questions.
think it's going to be stuff as we're thinking about you.
Okay, all right. So let me understand that theory should be universalizable. We can find a context outside the geographical location of the origin of the theory, which should be applicable. If it is not, it's simply essentializing the theory. If it's not universalizable, then it's not a theory. It means it's not solving that theory. That's context. So if you find a context here, and a theory emerges, if you find another context outside that geographical context, it should apply to it. That's why Western theories are fostered.
But isn't the struggle that you're looking at?
So because the context isn't right, and the theories don't fit because the context is not right. That's why they are not universalizable. But once the context is right, it is universalizable. Universalizable is not that it must apply to everything. It means that it fits every context wherever it's found.
I want to go.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So yes.
On the persons and the I'm not studying that very with full interest. The for us. At the beginning, I will be la that I remember I will be 19. I thank you to have but they are parents. You can conclude that. Okay, you can do the system. Parents actually or it's at the point about the first family their wish and getting the interest of the ideas of its missions. I don't know what's the thing on that. The last presenter about that in the and then those we are there are complete kind of skills. I think, for example, I am looking indigenous Sada. I mean, I have this provide sort of use a non-indigenous Sada. I think they were able to get on the intelligent space. How do we make that? It's looking at the funding standard. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Thank you all for that, for those listening presentations. My question goes to I'm the speaker, Mark, and how the legislative theorizing in Africa. I would like to know in African studies, this person knows combine this issue parallels in attitude. Who is great the African philosophy or African philosophy aspect. Theorizing in African studies. The question is that who should theorize in African studies and why? Then what makes the theory to be Africans? Like you have to belong to African people and why? Then the second question is in fact, the colonizing African approach to colonizing knowledge. Knowledge, we develop knowledge through research. And research has to do with money and data. Until today, most of the research we do in African studies, the funding is coming from the West. Then, in terms of publication, when you are publishing here and there, if you cannot publish in certain donor, people still recognize you as you are not doing this scholarship. So my question is that if you are still getting money from those people and we are colonizing, how are we sure we are doing this? How are we sure we are going to Nigeria? That's my question. Oh.
Thank you very much for the presentations. I want to ask Ahmed if presentations you've been trying to talk about the possibility of the dismissal of that system as non-scientific and we're not really flexible as word of feelings. So I want to know, is it that theories do not have other criteria for acceptance other than being science? That's what I would do.
Okay. So the questions for you, from one after the other. No order, you can just maybe begin with the last presenter.
Okay. Me, right? Yeah. That's me. All right, so I'll begin with the last question. That so I would say that non-scientific, you talk about indigenous theories, right? Or African of Afro-autochthonous. You know, I was careful enough to not mention African theories. However, what I referred to was autochthonous what? Ideologies, right? And that was very intentional. And talking about the juxtaposition of a non-scientificity of the Afro-autochthonous ideologies with the Eurocentric nature of Western theories, it actually refers to the empirical evidences that the Western theories would provide in instances. That does not necessarily ridicule. Remember, in the process of presentation, I coined it under, you know, epistemological liabilities. And do not forget that for you to have a balance sheet, there must be an asset in relation to liabilities. And then for the question on who should theorize in African studies? I put it to you. Who should theorize? Why do you think you should theorize in African studies? Of what relevance is theorizing in African studies to your work as a researcher in African studies? Anyone who is interested in decolonizing Western epistemologies. And sometimes I am kind of very conscious, you notice in the context of the presentation, apart from the reference to Ngugi wa Thiong'o's Decolonizing the Mind, I was careful to use the word decoloniality because in several contexts it's been overflowed. And that is why I reference complementarity in the context of the paper. And that also, I think, to a large extent, answers question 2, talking about conflicts in terms of space. Of course, if you have someone you're working with, I am Edo, for example, and the presentations I brought here and then the hypotheses I presented, I had one in Yoruba, I had another in Hausa, right? I mean, that has nothing to, language has nothing to go, language has nothing to do with it. Right. However, in promoting African epistemologies, language, indigenous language, for example, is actually very necessary. And why? You know, when I started with a Benin adage. Another thing that time didn't permit me to mention is the context, is the loss, meaning loss in translating some of these ideologies, right, or Afro-autochthonous epistemologies to Western ideologies. For example, when I said Noyemi or Ora Nomaya Oya Bizaga, I mean, in interpreting to one who owns something will preserve it or will mind it, the one who doesn't own it. Actually, there is a huge contextual loss of meaning in that translation. And thank you so much, sir, for your inputs. I appreciate that. And I think that's about it. Thank you, sir.
If you don't mind, can we just switch over to Damilola Denise? It's online. I'm glad you're still in kind of that. Can you hear us? Okay, I'll finish.
Yes, I can hear you. Now, the question says that, why did I use that approach? Yes, I use that approach because the research is a biological research, which requires qualitative approach. And it involves a structured interview. I have to interview the person because it's a biographical research. So I think that answered it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. I saw that as part of the methods you used, you had other ones, and that's why I'm asking. The person who's alive, you can just interview the person, but you had other methods. That's why I'm asking, but that's fine. And then I was asking also what theory, I mean, this panel is about theorizing. What theory did you use?
Theory. No, I'm not using any theory because it's a purpose food sampling. And hello?
Yes, okay.
So it's not a must I use theory because it's case study research. And if you have any theory I can use, sir, you can actually tell me, sir.
It's necessary that you use a theory. Theories help to explain phenomena. So, I mean, it's a theory that says when you can be a theory like, oh, when you hear someone, then you can make, you can analyze the qualities of the person. Really seeing is sonology. So some there are theories you can use, but you should have a theory. Thank you.
All right, sir. Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you, Chair. Essentially, your question was, why did I use three theoretical frameworks? Well, I use three, not one, because the barriers that homegrown theories face are three-pronged. We have the structural barriers, we have the epistemological barriers, and we have the institutional barriers. So one theory tackles each barrier. That's how come I use three theoretical frameworks. Now, to my good friend Isaiah's question, I sum it up in the expression, he who pays the piper calls the tune. Am I right in summing it that way? All right. So if we are trying to decolonize knowledge, and those who fund us are the hegemonic Western institutions, how can we effectively decolonize indigenous knowledge? It's very simple. When we are able to build, when I say we, I'm talking about us, we Africans are able to build ourselves to that stage where our governments value research and therefore will allocate money for that purpose. Well, thank you. Then we'll not always, as academics, go cap in hand to the West for funding, because so long as they fund us, chances are that they will dictate to us what we should investigate, how we should investigate, and what outcomes should come out of the investigation. So for me, the way out is to ensure that we conscientize our government, so to speak, to find space in their funding to fund research that seeks to decolonize knowledge. That's my response.
All right, before we move to the next question, there's a difference between theories and frameworks and the theory. So you have a framework, and then you latch on to your theories. So to have three frameworks for a work, for a study, is different.
So obviously, I was using the wrong terminology. I should in a framework. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So the last.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. You asked that if there are multiple versions of eco-philosophy. Yes, there are. You have deep ecology, we have ecofeminism. I would have mentioned them if not for time. And you were particular about how they can be synchronized together instead of having them with different aspects. So I talked about, yes, they can be synchronized together when you look at the principles. And you also mentioned that instead of localizing them, bringing in African perspective. I believe all the other aspects of eco-philosophy, most of them are Western ideologies rooted in Western epistemology. So the African's perspective is yet to be articulated as part of the or as one of the versions of eco-philosophy. Yes, they can be synchronized, but we can also have what we call pluralism. I think that is also allowed in scholarship. But that's my response. The other question, I don't think he's not here because I could hardly hear him. And I really wish he would have explained further. But I think he talked about the connection between ethics and philosophy. That was what he started with. And the conflict of ideas.
Yeah, he had a question
yes.
about theory, but he's not here. So we'll move on. I think we've done very well this time presentations. And thank you for having me here to chair the panel. On that note, if there are no more questions, we can bring the panel session. Good presentations and just okay, all right. So thank you very much for those online. Thank you so much. We are glad you joined the panel. Without being asked, I'd like to say 3 presenters came from the Institute of African and Diaspora Studies, University of Texas. So we do a lot of theorizing there. So well, thank you very much for hanging in there with us online. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's Albert Robert. Immediately. Good
afternoon, everyone, and welcome to part 3 of the series titled Theorizing African Studies, Continuities and Changes. My name is Amenala Idalu. I am the panel organizer, also doubling as a chair for this session. And here today we'll be having 3 contributions, intellectually stimulating contributions by the first is reimagining African studies, theorizing continuities in tradition and changes in modernity across disciplines by Peter Akerele. Secondly, we shall be having demystifying Western theories, the Palava theory in conflict management in Kiabodu, Delta State by Dennis Ashara. And the third, the theories of change and sustainability in Ori Ibeji performances by Babatunji Dada and Omola Bekele. We'll be having engagement as well from our virtual participants. And we hope that we're going to take it chronologically as I have already called out the names. So for the virtual participants, please, when it's time for you to present, kindly unmute and you begin with your presentation. And so for chronological flow, I would implore that after each presentation, we can begin with questions and contributions to each of the panelists' presentation. Thank you very much. I'll call on the first presenter today, Peter Akerele of Federal University, to please proceed. Thank you. Go ahead. The time begins. And then in 20 minutes, you should be able to summarize.
Sorry, I'm still struggling to understand. However, let me see. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
My name is Akerele Peter Adilaja, a doctoral student from Obafemi Awolowo University, and also a lecturer in the Federal University, Benin Kebbi. The topic before us this afternoon is captioned Reimagine African Studies, Theorizing Continuity in Traditional and Changes in Modernity Across Discipline. As a way of introduction, Excuse me. Sorry. Yeah, as a way of introduction, in African studies, the concept of continuity and discontinuity are central to the understanding of social, cultural, political, and economic. Now, continuity refers to the persistence of certain elements, practice, or structure over time that breaks the transformation every society. Discussing on this theme often revolves around how past influences shape the present and future, and often around how past influence and shape African society, and also to maintain the divergence and the dichotomy between the developed country and other developed countries. However, African studies as an academic field has undergone significant transformation from colonial and post-colonial era to the present. Traditionally viewed through ethnocentric lenses, African intellectuals and scholars have long contested the binaries of tradition and modernity. Now, talking about contemporary society, scholars emphasize the need to revisit how African culture or African cultural philosophy, political tradition persists, transform, and influence modern academic and social institutions. The ongoing conversation around reimagining of African studies thus entails recognizing the independence of tradition and modernity and how this dynamic shape knowledge production, identity formation, and development paradigm across disciplines. Now, the motivation for this study. This study is motivated by the need to challenge the long-standing dichotomy between tradition and modernity in African studies. It recognizes that African studies have never been static. Instead, they continuously reinterpret their tradition in response to modern challenges by exploring how continuity and change interact across disciplines. This research seeks to highlight agencies of African scholars and community in shaping knowledge, identity, and development on their own terms. The study intends to contribute to the decolonization of African studies by advocating for African-centered interdisciplinary approach that bridge the gap between indigenous and epistemologies with contemporary realities. E.g., we could see in the educational sector that there's a transformation from BB Mass to CC Mass curriculum in the university, whereby 70% of the content, 30% of the content are to take care of the local content. That is, we need to intimate our students with some of the realities around us in order to enrich knowledge production. Now, why reimagine? Reimagine African studies and theorizing involves a critical reevaluation of existing framework by emphasizing the need to diverse perspective and promoting African-led scholarship. This includes decolonizing knowledge production, fostering interdisciplinary approach, and addressing issues of power, language, and identity in relation to African experience. Now, talking about the map of Africa as well, we could see that the geographical contextualization of African have some regional context to help to understand where the tradition being discussed originated and evolved over time. For example, in the cultural, in the linguistic, and political diversity of the region. For example, we could see that Hausa language are being spoken by some of these African countries like Mali, Niger, and Chad, whereas such language is also, dominant in Nigeria. So by situating the discussion with African context, the map is an illustration to tell us that knowledge, as it were, of continuity in diversity is a concept that is a front burner of conversation in academics today. Now, the second item we need to understand is that tradition in practice, looking at the ethnic and cultural zones, we saw that linguistic, as it were, talking about language, is what is binding us together before we add the contact with the whites. So to say that Africa have their means of communication, but as it were today, English is seen as a borrowed language. But before the contact with the Europeans, or before we are colonized, we all have our own indigenous language that we speak in order to communicate. The next item we need to look at modernity and urbanization. West Africa has rapidly urbanized cities. For instance, we see that Lagos is one of the urbanized cities in Nigeria before we add interaction or we contact with the Europeans. Political and educational landscape as well also be considered, including decolonizing our curriculum and languages policy. We see that government has come out with some policy as a result of the influence that we had with the foreign countries. That takes us to the key focus in reimagining African studies. Number one is by decolonizing knowledge production, moving away from the Eurocentric perspective and entering African voices, experiences, and epistemologies in research and scholarship. This involves critically examining how colonialism has shaped knowledge production about Africa and actively changing existing power structure. Recognizing knowledge about Africa is complex and multifaceted, requiring engagement across different disciplines such as history, literature, political science, anthropology, and cultural studies. Now, taking us further, the research problem for this study is that despite efforts to decolonize African society, a significant gap remains in understanding how traditions and modernity interact as intertwined rather than oppositional force in African society. And that could be found in the works of Mudebi, 1998, and Bebe, 2001. Existing literature often reinforces the colonial dichotomy between traditional and modern, neglecting the nuanced ways in which African communities adopt, reinterpret, integrate traditional values within modern systems. Now, research questions. Number one, how do African intellectual and cultural traditions persist and evolve within modern academies and social framework across disciplines? Two, what way have African scholars and practitioners negotiated the tension between traditional modernity across disciplines such as literature, philosophy, government, and education? The research objective is as follows. Number one, examine the discontinuity of African indigenous knowledge system, cultural values, and philosophy within contemporary academic, political, and cultural institutions. Two, to analyze how African thinkers and disciplines integrate or resist modern paradigm while reasserting traditional epistemologies in shaping African study. That leads us to the significance of the study. One of the significance of the study is to contribute to the intellectual reorientation of African studies by bridging discipline, device, and promoting a holistic understanding of African modernity. It offers a framework for decolonizing education, governance, and culture, while validating African modes of knowing as integral to contemporary global discourse. The insight would aid policymaker, educator, cultural practitioner, and researcher in designing development strategies rooted in African reality. Now, the theory that guides this study are one, modernity theory by Schwell and sister. It argues that African society experienced modernity in diverse cultural specific ways. Two, post-colonial theory by Edward Said. It also unpacks the hybridity and negotiation between tradition and colonial modern paradigm. Three, Afrocentric and decolonized perspective, who also talks to argue that African indigenous system or knowledge system as valid and involving epistemology. That is, before we add the contact with the European, with the whites, we all have our own knowledge system. The methodology for this study is a qualitative study, and the method is the research design, that helps us in this, that is adopted for this theory is the qualitative and comparative in nature. Contextual analysis of literature and philosophical texts will be used to source for information, and also secondary data will be used as well. Key informal interview with scholars, educators, and cultural practitioners across selected universities in Nigeria. Data source, academic publication in African studies, government and institutional documents, interview and speech or opinion pool from intellectuals and policymakers will also be sorted. The scope of this study is that focuses on selected African universities in Nigeria, and of course we have them in the 6 geopolitical zone. And of course we pick one in each geopolitical zone to represent each of the geopolitical zones, where the tension and synergy between tradition and modernity are highly visible. It will cover a key discipline such as philosophy, literature, political science, and education to reflect the diversity of African thought. Expected contribution to this knowledge, to the body of knowledge. Theoretically, a reconceptualization of traditional modernity dynamics in African thought. 2, the methodological as a mode for interdisciplinary approach for African-centered research. 3, practically insight for curriculum reform in cultural policy and post-colonial notion will also be sorted. Conceptual overview. The conceptual framework provides a structured understanding of how continuity in tradition and changes in modernity interact with African studies across multiple disciplines. In conclusion, this study helps or intends to source for opinion pool from stakeholders that are in the educational sector to ensure and to inform us how collaborations within discipline can be informed and help us to also understand better how modernity has impacted educational system. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Peter Akerele, for your presentation. And again, the topic is reimagining African studies, theorizing continuities in tradition and changes in modernity across disciplines. I was wondering if I was actually anticipating conceptual clarification of the binaries you mentioned, binaries between, talking about the tradition and modernity. And you didn't conceptualize what you meant by modernity. Is it Western form of modernity? Is it Westernized or African? However, in the course of your presentation, you mentioned African modernity at some point. However, there was no justification of the nexus between these factors you're trying to bring about. And in your conclusion, you are proposing the question, right, which is one of your recent questions back to the audience, to get their responses. However, I'll throw this open to the audience before we get back to you to react to that. Let's communicate with our audience online. If you have questions, kindly raise the virtual hand for recognition. And for those of us here in the room, you have questions for chief to further develop the paper, or if you are unclear, you need clarity from the presenter, kindly, yes, please, you may proceed.
Now, I really appreciate it. Very, very. There can be a division of seven. We will be that point of the year to deal with that you have the mathematical analysis there and you can also easily make up some maths in the real stuff. But at the end of everything, you need to go 5 or 6 findings from the question. No, it's but I find this that facts are not conditional. And whatever they use, you know, okay, say. I will do that. The setup already done. It's all going because I need to start nothing. I start looking at like this.
Thank you. You take notes of the questions, you'll take all of the questions and you will react. Yes.
My local client is the issue of cost. Because we say that something is very good. There's nothing wrong with theorizing continuities. Maybe you need to reframe that topic. So we are talking about other disciplines. I don't know how one theory, we take care of across disciplines. In every university, there are a lot of disciplines we have untangibly. Because we have different number of questions. I mean, talking about questions, I'm talking about discipline. So maybe you will break that down there. You still need more consideration of. Because when you are talking about tradition can be formal. Tradition can be the way of life of a particular set of people, and it can be the way of doing things. So it can communicate different meanings. So maybe we conceptualize it. Then you need to be conceptualize your methods very well. We said that you need to tell us exactly which type of people that you consider who can do to be your respondents and where, and you'll be able to justify it. Okay, if you are taking the course, you are taking those through. Why I'm not going to tell this, and that's my idea.
Okay, maybe we go with it, so we don't lose the line of thought. You have 5 minutes to respond to the questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, the study is ongoing. So I brought here an opportunity for scholars to also help me to fine tune it and see how I can carry out for their right paper. And that's answers the question. What kind of question?
Maybe consider mention like this.
Okay, no finding, not a single finding, but however, in your introductory part, you referenced your findings. I was wondering how you jump already to suppose conclusion before you arrive there. So I think you may need to check the work altogether. And what as I mentioned also, I wrote here one tradition talking about conceptualization of what you intended to do. What tradition are you talking about? What modernity do you intend? What constitutes the African modernity that you wish to interrogate? All right. And then what's the relevance of the African theories? You talked about geographical contextualization. You mentioned African theories. You mentioned ethics. You mentioned cultural studies. So it got us lost, and I'm wondering how all this fits in across disciplines. Again, what Isaiah is talking about. So I think that these figures will actually reshape your work. Do you have anything more to say? We have responded to the first two questions. All right, please. Give me your question.
It's very simple. I feel that which allows certain figures to gain the they address of things and so I think we need to put that in that we define the way and help us gain understanding within the framework of concepts and their ethics.
Thank you so very much. Okay.
No, is it possible that just give a sleeping to make any disciplines? That is
No, let discipline. What discipline? What discipline?
What discipline?
What
discipline? Yes.
All right, thank you so very much. I appreciate your input, and then we move on to the second speaker for today. Our speaker is connected. We have Dennis. Thank you. So Dennis Ashara from Edinburgh University will be presenting the paper entitled Demystifying Western Theories, the Palava Theory in Conflict Management in Global Delta Set. Dennis, you may proceed, please. Thank you.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I must start by apologizing for my inability to be physically present in Lagos. I tried all my best, but some institutional rules and regulations. Nevertheless, I am very pleased to be here. And Dennis Ashara, from Edwin Clark University in Kiagbodo. Kiagbodo is located in Burutu local government area of Delta State. I'm here to present this paper titled The Demystification of Western Theories for African Problems, an assessment of the Palava theory in conflict management processes in Kiagbodo. My interest in Kiagbodo arose as a result of some experiences I've had in the short time I have spent working within the environment, Kiagbodo. I've been there for over 2 years as an academic staff. And Kiagbodo is an Ejo community. Kiagbodo is an Ejo community which was founded by an Ejo man known as Ibile from Bayelsa State, the present-day Bayelsa State, somewhere in Olobri in Bayelsa State, in the 17th and within the 17th and 18th centuries. However, what's important for us in the course of this is to know that the constitution or the makeup of the society of Kiagbodo community is of interest. And that's the fact that Kiagbodo is made, though not publicly pronounced, it is made up of two distinct categories of persons. Number one,
Dennis, are you still there, please? We cannot hear you.
One, and then there is the slaves, former slaves, who at the end of the slave trade, who could not be sold, and then decided to integrate into the Kiagbodo community. So today there is a common conflict within the community, and that is between these two different people that make up Kiagbodo. The interest of this study is to look at the Palava theory as a management process for African problems, rather than the Western theories that have become very overwhelming. Kiagbodo is a typical African environment, very, very far away from the major towns of Delta states like Warri and Ughelli. The people are very peace-loving. However, they have encountered a lot of conflicts, of which I have witnessed. And then it happens that the need to look at or to pay attention to local conflict management strategies or measures becomes very necessary. Now, let me just say a little thing. Say, in many African societies, Western conflict management theories have been rooted in individualism, legalism, and adversarial proceedings, which have proven incompatible with the continent's communal and relational traditions. These Western models often disregard indigenous systems that have sustained African communities for centuries. The aim of the study, therefore, is to examine the efficacy of the Palava theory as against the Western theories as an indigenous conflict resolution and management style that is peculiar to African communities. Now, to carry out this study, the methodology adopted was the qualitative methods. And it came with a reliance on in-depth interviews, the use of in-depth interviews, focus group discussions, and as well as archival sources, which were adopted to examine how Palava theory is effective in addressing relative conflicts in Kiagbodo. The author's analysis is based on interviews, while the discussion, so the analysis based on interviews as well as thematic analysis. Overall, the research argues the need for a rethink of the resolution of African conflicts by incorporating the Palava theory, which is an indigenous conflict management theory. Now, what is Palava theory? This is an African system or model for the management of African conflicts. African conflicts are unique to Africans. For example, the issues of land, the issue of kingship, where the kings or the king or traditional ruler should come from, issues like family, interfamily problems, marriage problems. These are some of the issues that the Western conflict models may not have been able to manage, and rather has created further conflicts in the process. So the theory, the Palava theory, emphasizes the preference for African communal philosophies as against Western philosophies in the management of African conflicts. The theory emphasizes the importance and nature of communication open discussions which are conducted under the Palava tree. The Palava tree is where parties to conflicts, community elders, leaders, and representatives of different interest groups within the community adopt dialogue to reach a consensus. The process is guided by norms and values, which include communal respect, communal interests, respect for one another, restorative justice, and of course, the prioritization of reconciliation over punishment. Palava creates physical, social, and psychological space for open communication so that persons can be integrated into the life and expectations of their communities. Several theories, several researchers and authors have supported this theory. For example, Steve stated that through the Palava, African communities heal sickness, educate their members about moral standards, and reconcile enemies. The Palava theory is based on 3 commitments that intersect with the goals of conflict reconciliation. Number 1 is a commitment to open communication, especially truth-telling, that eventually or most expectedly leads to what is referred to as positive peace as against negative peace. A commitment to memory or developing a shared sense of the past. And thirdly, a commitment to reconciliation at the communal level. Like I said when I started, Kiagbodo is a community located in Burutu, Delta State. Conflict resolutions in Kiagbodo community are usually done through Palava sessions. Though the local people may not know, of course, they do not know the name, there is a name in academics or in African studies that could be referred to as Palava, but this is what they practice, even in the modern time. So the Palava sessions are normally held in the Mbile Hall, which serves as the community. The hall is located in the middle of the community. And the hall represents the Palava tree. The Mbile Hall is a sacred hall where the founder of Kiagbodo, known as Mbile, was buried. Mbile migrated, as I said, from Bayelsa State. However, after his death, it was hot, which was later remodeled into a modern block today, known as the Mbile Hall. However, this remodeling and decision to designate the hall as Mbile Community Hall was a collective effort of all members of the community. Hence, decisions that are taken in this hall by all are binding on all members. The Palava sessions are usually convened by the Amadiwe, which is the region name for community head or the council of elders. During each sessions, this is what happens. All conflicting parties are present, along with interested community members who serve as witnesses and moral support. They are responsible for maintaining peace, peaceful coexistence, administering contracts, overseeing communal assets such as land and natural resources, and ensuring community safety. Principles such as dialogue, inclusivity, and of course, consensus building are applied, strictly applied. So the role of the elders in these sessions include the resolution of conflicts by settling disputes through restoration of social harmony, seeking truth, punishing perpetrators or those found guilty, and of course, compensating victims through gifts or public apologies. The involvement of elders lends legitimacy to this process. Elders are generally revered for their wisdom, spirituality, and so restorative justice. In Kiagbodo society, justice is administered by community leaders such as the elders, the chiefs, the king, who are respected for their wisdom. The community is not merely a backdrop for justice proceedings, but a central participant in the restoration process. There is a dimension, so the spiritual dimension in this process of conflict resolution. And this is that, for example, in Kiagbodo, conflict resolution conventions often take place at this Mbile Hall, which is a revered center accepted by the whole community. It is believed that the spirit of the founder of the community, Mbile, is present there. So the Mbile Hall is also located opposite the main village shrine, which is known as Oguberi, and is believed to have spiritual connections to the decisions made during these palaver sessions in the hall.
You have 5 more minutes. You have 5 minutes. Kindly wrap up, please.
Okay. So the spiritual worldview of the Jaw people reinforces compliance, and then violations of palaver agreements are believed to invoke ancestral displeasure. However, there are challenges. These challenges include the changing societal values, Christianity, which many Christians within the community are opposed to the practice, and they have raised varying degrees of criticism, especially when it comes to oath-taking and other ritual systems. In the event that a party to a conflict refuses to comply with the conflict resolution system, another challenge is that the enforcement of the decisions of palaver may be illegal, hampered by the inability to handle complex legal and criminal issues. These challenges in power asymmetry, where one party dominates within the community. In conclusion, this study has found that Western conflict resolution styles or models are often presented as universal and superior. However, the research has revealed that, on the contrary, Western models prioritize individual rights, while the palaver model emphasizes communal harmony, encouraging and promoting continued coexistence, offers a system, a process where conflict is settled and all parties receive justice. So there is some take-homes here. And that's one, there should be a formal, or what I can call recommendations. There should be a formal governance structures that will recognize palaver resolutions in local judicial systems. Community leaders and legal practitioners should be subjected to indigenous conflict management trainings. And then finally, both models, Western and indigenous, could be combined to make conflict resolution more effective. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. I was actually intrigued when I saw the word palaver theory. I was wondering what it was, and when you began to expatiate, the term palaver was almost, in opposite to what it was set to do as a theory. However, I was trying to figure out the crux of your presentation by identifying the problem that your paper posits in bridging the academic knowledge that this panel was set up for, or was intended for. You cited sheets, deployment or use of palaver theories work. There are other proponents like Koisai Wiredu has that also in work with palaver theory. So I was wondering what nuances your paper was trying to, contribute. So you may want to answer the relevance of that. What is new? So I actually tagged them, like, what is the sole work of your presentation? What do we think? Because from your narration,
okay,
framework, we could get already what the Palava theory, the conflict resolution aspect of the Palava theory. So we'd like for you to identify those gaps and how that actually reflects. And again, I was actually also looking out for a juxtaposition of a Western theory that can be applied to the Palava theory in terms of contrariness or complementarity, right? So I think that we will consider that. But before you respond to that, we'll leave the floor open to other contributions. Are there other contributions, whether here or from our online participants? If anyone wants to, okay, we have it. Any other question, please? Okay, so we'll take one question from here and you respond to both. Thank you so very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes.
That one minor issue, so.
Okay.
We can't hear you. Can you hear
Are
me?
you hearing me?
I'm not hearing it clear. It's not clear. The voice is not clear, please.
Are you hearing me now?
Okay, I think it's better.
Okay. So I said I have some issue with your topic. If I can get you right, I think Palapa theory is an African theory. African resolution
Yes.
theory. And when you look at the entry points, we said demystifying Western theories. Demystifying, if I may define it very well, like you are trying to explain something. And your entry point is that you are demystifying Western theory. And the other side of the topic, you are trying to explain what Palapa theory is all about. So there's a bit disconnect because what you are trying to do is you are trying to build an alternative angle to the Western theory we are using. It's not just demystify it, like they are still explaining it for us. So you can just change that word. Maybe you'll be thinking something in your soul. You can find the best English so that still be as if they are still explaining. You just the topic in that area. Then the second one, which is my observation. You know, the law of any land is supreme. I know in Enugu State, I can't remember the local government now, but there's a conflict resolution method called, I think, Ikwe or so, where they used to settle conflicts among people in Enugu State. I know myself and someone who wrote a paper on it. When we are trying to push for the policy in the southeastern Nigeria, I remember we faced a lot of problems about 2 or 3 years back. We are able to push for it because of the supremacy of the constitution. It is an internal something. Maybe with the proposition of regional government, maybe we begin to have a kind of regional law to back it up. So there will be a conflict between that procedure and the constitution of the land. You can take me to the court and bring up a kind of regional or communal arrangement to resolve issue. I can go to court and have right. The what they can do is to tell you to leave the community, and they cannot tell you I can challenge that. So maybe you still need to do one or two things in that area in your recommendation. Maybe you recommend that people in the community should liaise with the people in National Assembly to push for it the way they are pushing for community policing in southwestern Nigeria and the other one in other parts of the country. So that's the decision.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, sir.
What are your final thoughts, Dennis? Do they want to react to some of the...
Yes. First of all, the topic demystification, I think I don't need to argue that. I'm going to look at that. I'm going to review that. And then to the first, there's also another recommendation or suggestion that the speaker made, especially when he talked about regional laws, that will give more credence or give credence to Palava models. But The first madam that spoke, she, if I heard her very well, I think she was asking what's new in the research and why why there was need for that research. What's actually new there in this research is there are, in Kiagbodo, for example, where the study was carried out, the observation I personally made was that the community is exposed to so many different kinds of conflicts. And then most of these conflicts that are issues that should be addressed internally among them have not been addressed like that. Let me be very specific. I mentioned something like the freeborn and the slave is a very sensitive issue within the community. In fact, during the course of interviews, some of the speakers, they are very cautious, but they made me understand that it's a very serious conflict within the community. And it is also not just peculiar to Kiagbodo, but so many other parts of like where I come from, the southeast where I come from, there's something we call the Osuke system, which has created a lot of social crisis within the community, irrespective of what Christianity says about it and all that. So there is a need. I felt or thought that there is a need to pay attention to these aspects of conflicts, and then see how we can adopt Palava model of conflict resolution rather than constantly running to the courts and involving the governments in some of these conflicts within the community. So that's what while a lot of research had been conducted actually in the course of literature review, I found out, but this particular aspect became of serious concern to me.
Thank you so very much for yes. Thank you for the clarification. Thank you so much. We have another question.
Not really a question, comments, because it seems you are not clear with what Asada said. He said, as much as possible, you should try to as much as to make a recommendation on complementing the regional law with this Palava law. Why you are giving them recommendation on that? Please, House of Assembly, it can be state of House of Assembly. It's possible. If it can be National Assembly, it's possible. What you said, try to do something to make sure that what you are insisting on or what you are stressing on that Palava theory to complement what is going on and what is the present, what is the existing law in the region.
Okay.
Please try to take note of that. I need that you mention it.
That is well noted by Dennis. He acknowledged that actually the first time before we began to expatiate on my question. So we'll have the final thoughts for your presentation before we move on. We were supposed to have a third presentation by Babatunji Dada and Nomola Baketa. However, they are not connected online. If you're there, maybe registered under another name, kindly indicate so that we recognize your presence. Otherwise, we're moving on to final thoughts. Yes, please.
Yes, thank you very much, everybody. I want to appreciate everyone for their insightful contribution. I want to assure you that I will go back, see how I can work this work, and that will become better for publication. Thank you very much.
So I suppose that brings us. Yes, any other word from? And thank you so very much. Oh yes, please. Proceed. Yes.
And you are speaking and then election. And the points. Let us this by this kind of conflict of assisted part-time that a little provides and is doing this source. How is talking that we would get a so how is the aspiration over time access, without access to things like this.
Sure. Dennis, can you hear me, please?
No. I
Okay.
can't hear. I can't hear.
Can you come here? Can you come here?
And please, you need to project so that, yes, you can hear. Kindly start over. Thank you.
Yeah, so I
Yes,
said,
thank you.
when we look at issues of conflict management, and the use of the Palava theory that you just mentioned to address our conflict, maybe in terms of our resolution, is I would liken it to during my time in one of the communities of Oyo State, when we had the height of the header farmer conflict across Ibarapa, Takpa, Ayete, several places. And one of the issues I wanted to look at was what were the local conflict resolution methods that they are deployed over time, not just among the Yorubas, those who are indigenous of the land, but also here the sites of the Fulani leaders there in that place. And aside of the fact that the government put in place maybe security agencies or manforce, is the fact that they tell you, okay, we have been able to resolve this, to talk about this. But however, one major issue I have had with putting out a local conflict resolution method is to ask myself, what are the gender dimensions to conflict resolution methods, so that when we begin to push out these issues or begin to propose certain methods of conflict management, and that question now comes in to begin to explore the dynamics of gender, which plays a critical role, because oftentimes today we want to say, oh, women oftentimes are marginalized out of these conflict resolution methods because of the case of patriarchy, which is the predominant force when it comes to discussing issues of conflict resolution. So the point is the intersection of gender in conflict management methods or local resolution methods. Thank you.
Dr. Dennis, would you like to respond to that briefly?
Okay, talking about the gender, like I rightly said when I was doing the presentation, that the Palava sessions recognizes representatives of different groups. It is very, very sensitive when it comes to that. It takes women leaders, it takes the first daughters or the most senior daughter in every family. These are people who represent, so their views, their expressions are recognized. So it is not a model or a system that is opposed to, or that is not sensitive to gender issues. Thank you.
Yes, please. Thank you, Dr. Dennis. Yes, please.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I was just thinking about it in terms of scale of application, the applicability of another theory or method or model, particularly considering the complexity of society. Possibly you might want to look at maybe the application of this in micro situations or possibly in management in organizations where you have a manageable size of people and the hierarchy is defined. So it might be interesting if you're looking at how that can be applied or adopted in those scenarios as against scaling it to having societal relevant yes, that kind of a thing. So I'm thinking that the Palava model could be more usable and useful in contained environments where structures are defined within very manageable confines. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. I think that brings us to the end of today's session. Thank you for such intellectually stimulating session and everything targeted towards reconfiguring African studies. And we realized from your presentations, both presentations, that reconfiguring African studies or in decolonizing epistemology, there need to reevaluate existing theories, revise, and possibly reformat. And that is actually what the discourse has been all about. I see a similarity between your presentation and Peter Akerede's presentation. And thank you so very much for submitting your presentation and to ensure a robust panel. This, as I said earlier, is part 3 of 4 parts of this session that is titled Continuities and Changes Theorizing African Studies. Right, so we look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow at 5:30. I say a big thank you to our online audience who stays through to engage in today's session. Thank you so very much, and do have a great day.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ame. Peter, I can see you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kelly. Bye-bye.